Intro. Hey friends, and welcome to Poor Man is Magic, a place where the wild cards never rain on our parade. Today we are continuing our new player tutorial week by upgrading some of the dual color starter decks. Now this topic is going to be broken up into two videos. This first video will feature the 5 decks you see in front of you: Strength in Numbers, Stealthy Subterfuge, On the Hunt, Spellweaver, and Angelic Accountants. And the next video will do the other half of the 10 dual starter decks. So let's dive right in. The first one we'll do is Strength in Numbers. Now, as this deck is built, it really relies on getting out as many little creatures as you can using things like Join the Dance, having a Venom Connoisseur on the board, and then being able to attack past any bigger creatures using Venom Connoisseur's Alliance mechanic, which says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Venom Connoisseur gains Death Touch, and if this is the second time the ability has resolved, all creatures you control gain Death Touch until end of turn. So this is going to turn all of your little 1/1s into Death Touchy little 1/1s, and hopefully that's enough to get you past. You also have some pump spells in Luxurious Libation, which also creates a token. You have a flyer. You have Celebrity Fencer, which says whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Fencer. But the issue here is that you often can't go wide enough, fast enough, and there really aren't any top-end payoffs. So, how can we make this deck a little bit better? How can we improve the curve, especially on the top end, to give more of our creatures a little bit more power and toughness and a little bit more threat? And how can we maybe endure a few board wipes by incorporating some tax cards? So the first thing I want to do is pull over some of the cards that we're going to want to add. Now, before you do anything else, you should make sure you go in and switch the deck format to standard, unless you want to play alchemy, but for this one, we'll be doing standard set. So we'll go ahead and select standard, and now we can go in and look for some of the cards we want to add. The first one I'm going to look at is Thalia, Garden of Thraben. Now, this is a 2-mana, first strike legendary human soldier, and this is going to make non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. Now, the good thing about Thalia is that she's going to make those board wipes cost 1 extra mana. They're also going to make Planeswalker threats cost 1 extra mana, and any sort of removal spell, like a Go for the Throat or a Cast It Down, cost 1 extra mana. And oftentimes, that's going to make all the difference between an opponent taking out your major threat when they need to on curve, and you being able to endure 1 more turn and get over the finish line. So we're going to add 2 copies of Thalia. The next card I want to look at is going to be Adeline. Now, we already have 1 copy from the starter deck, but I would really like to add 2 more copies if possible. Adeline is really a huge threat and a must answer all unto herself. She has vigilance, she can create human creature tokens that are tapped and attacking. Following a board wipe, this is the kind of card you want to have in your hand to come down the next turn and start repopulating your board. Next, we will look at Brutal Cathar. Now, Brutal Cathar is also a human soldier, and you might notice that we're playing and pulling quite a few of the mono-white human soldier type cards into this deck, but these are good for a reason. So Brutal Cathar is a 2-mana, 1-white human soldier werewolf that says when this creature enters the battlefield or transforms back into Brutal Cathar, exile a target creature an opponent controls until Brutal Cathar leaves the battlefield. So this is going to come down and be able to remove an opposing threat, be able to remove an opposing blocker, and clear the way for some of your smaller 1/1s or 2/1s to get through and start dealing some damage. So we're also going to throw in 2 of these. Next, we'll take a look at Catilda Dawnheart Prime. Now, Catilda Dawnheart Prime doesn't do a whole lot on her own, but I think she is a must-include in any token build. Catilda is going to turn all your human creatures into mana, and it also has this mana sink for 4 mana, 1 green, 1 white, and a tap, which puts a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. Now, Catilda could be a 1 or 2 slot, and we're going to probably just leave in 1 for now. But this is really going to turn some of those earlier creatures, some of those ramp creatures, into threats in the late game if Catilda sticks around. And it's going to help you ramp into some very powerful 1, to even 3 spell turns by turn 4 or 5. Next, we're going to take a look at Coppercoat Vanguard. So Coppercoat Vanguard is one of the new additions, and it is an uncommon level spell, something that you should be including in every other human deck and in most of your soldier decks as well, if you're stuck on kind of the artisan level deck building. So this is actually going to be a 4 of. I love this card. It gives other humans ward. It gives other humans a little bit more power. It is a must answer on its own before your board really starts spiraling out of control. And then lastly, we are going to take a look at a card that was also included in this starter deck. And that's going to be Hopeful Initiative. Hopeful Initiative is a 1 white creature with training, and it has a mana sink ability for 2 and 1 white. Allows you to remove 2+1/+1 counters from among creatures you control and destroy an artifact or enchantment. This is a really strong 1 mana play. And also in these sorts of decks, it's going to be important to establish your board as fast as possible with some additional value. So we're looking at doing things like rolling a Hopeful Initiate right into a Join the Dance, into a Catilda, into the rest of our threats. So now that we have made the additions that we want to make, let's go ahead and remove some of those cards that they're going to be replacing. The first of these is going to be Hold for Ransom. This is a very slow removal spell that doesn't take the creature off the board and doesn't prevent your opponent's creature from any activated abilities still activating. We'll go ahead and take these out. We'll also take out Citizen's Crowbar, as this is really a citizen-based deck inclusion. We're going to, unfortunately, take out Venom Connoisseur, even though she is a very important piece of that Alliance starter deck. And we're going to take out Civil Servant as well. Now, because we want to go fast, I think it's probably okay to leave in something like a Park Heights Pegasus. It's a little bit of evasion, and I love evasion. It rewards you for having creatures enter the battlefield, which can definitely happen in this deck. And we're going to take a look at our top end, though. Because we want to keep our deck pretty quick, we want to try to keep most of our plays between 1 and 3 mana, which means that we can't really afford to have these 4 and 5 mana cards be as much a part of this deck. So we're going to take out Take to the Streets, we're going to take out Darling of the Masses, and we're going to take out Celebrity Fencer. Now, this leaves a few other cards that I think are okay inclusions. Gathering Throng is probably a fairly strong common. You can leave it in if you would like. It is going to allow you to refill your hand with some high-powered cards, which I don't think is ever a bad thing. Halo Fountain is okay. It does require you to have a tapped creature already on the board in order to create more creatures, and it probably isn't going to work so much as an alternative win con. We'll actually go and remove that one. The next is Rumor Gatherer. So this is going to be somewhat similar to Park Heights Pegasus. It is a 3 mana play that is only a 2/1. It's going to die to pretty much everything, and the triggered ability, which is whenever another creature enters, scry 1, and if it's the second time that's happened, draw a card, is going to be a little bit hard to get to, especially without losing any momentum that you established in the early game. We're going to go ahead and actually cut these out. So you'll see that this leaves us at 51 cards out of 60 with a 16-20 5-land deck. So we'll go ahead and cut out one of the Blossoming Sands. Because most of our cards are between 1 and 3 mana, we can trim down our mana base a little bit. 24 lands is pretty good if your top end is around 4 or 5. And let's take a look at some of the other potential inclusions that we can make. Now, because we did take out our removal, being able to exile or destroy things in white is going to be important. Now, I wouldn't say we're playing enough planes to do something like a Lay Down Arms, although that is really good if you go heavier into the white. Something like Ossification I think is really strong. It hits target creatures and target planeswalkers. Something like Soul Partition could be good if you find yourself playing a lot of aggro matchups. But I think because we're hoping to be the aggressor here, the other rare that we're going to want to add is Invasion of Gobakhan. Now, this is one of the new Battle Siege cards, and it says whenever Invasion enters the battlefield, look at target opponent's hand. You can exile a non-land card from it, For as long as that card remains exiled, its owner may play it, but it costs 2 more to cast. And if you then are able to deal 3 damage to this Battle Siege with some of your smaller creatures, it will flip and you can cast it for the enchantment side. The enchantment side, which says at the beginning of your end step, put a 1/1 counter on each creature that attacked this turn, and you can sacrifice Light Shield Array, and creatures you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So this is going to do 2 things for us. It's a very high value play. It's going to remove a sweeper or a removal spell from our opponent's hand, make it cost a little bit more, and push their board wipes down the game a little ways. And it's also going to allow us to protect against those kinds of spells, even when our opponent gets to the mana necessary to cast them. So we're going to go ahead and put in 3 copies of this. And between our Invasion of Gobakhan and our Brutal Cathars, we probably have just enough removal to get by in these games, and we really just want to focus on going as quick and as big, letting our plays compound turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, and overwhelming our opponent. So let's take a look and see what other kind of token generation we can add to this. Now, Resolute Reinforcements is a fairly good inclusion. However, I will note that the token it creates is a white soldier creature, not a human token. Still okay, but not a perfect match for our deck. And we could always think about going for something like another Wedding Announcement, and if you have multiple wildcards to spend, this is definitely something that you could add more of, even up to a full playset if you wanted. We'll go ahead and add 2 more of those for now. And then, because our starter decks actually do give us 1 copy of the Wandering Emperor, this is a pretty good inclusion as well. This will allow us to remove an opposing creature, it'll give us some life gain against the likes of a mono red deck, and it is some token generation if we are in a kind of middling to even advantageous position in the game. So we'll add 1 copy of that. So that is going to, I think, be it for the token generation and the removal. Now, Gala Greeters is a rare. This is going to help you ramp in the form of treasure tokens and even catch up on life. But most decks now, especially the mid-range Esper and the mono red, are going to be playing so much removal that Gala Greeters isn't really going to be necessary in this deck. So I'm going to actually go ahead and cut this out and add 1 more copy of Join the Dance. Now, another thing that we might think about adding is some sort of Lord. So a Lord in Magic the Gathering is a card that gives other cards of similar creature types buffs, such as a +1/+1. So Coppercoat Vanguard could be considered a Lord, but the one that I am currently thinking of is a 3-mana King Darien. Now, King Darien is going to give all other creatures +1/+1, and is going to be a mana sink to help you buff up King Darien as well as create more tokens. Now, this is another rare card, but it does a lot of work alongside your Invasion of Gobakhan as well. So we'll go ahead and add 3 of these. And then that's going to bring us to 1 more card to add. Now, this is really going to be up to you. If I had my pick, I would throw in something like a Sigarda Champion of Light, which is a 4-mana Flying Trampler, which gives humans +1/+1, and allows you to take more creature cards out of the top 5 cards of your library. But I think we'll keep this particular edition at the uncommon level. And because we have so many low power and toughness creatures, I'm going to go ahead and throw in 1 more invasion in the form of Invasion of Moog, a 2-mana 1 green 1 white battle siege that is going to put counters on each creature you control. And when you flip it, is going to do the same thing, but in creature form. So we'll add this as our last copy and apply our styles. So taking a look at where we are now, in the 1-drop slot, we have Hopeful Initiate in 2 copies. We have some pump spells as well that are going to create a token and give our creatures a +X/+X buff. In the 2-mana slot is really where this deck starts to take off. We have Coppercoat Vanguard, which is going to give other humans we control +1 and ward. We have some tax in Invasion of Gobakhan and Thalia. We have some token creation in the form of Join the Dance, some ramp, and also a mana sink in the form of Catilda, and we have our Park Heights Pegasus, which is going to allow us to draw some cards. In the 3 slot, we have Brutal Cathar, which is going to be some removal. We have Gathering Throng, which is going to be helpful to play after a board wipe because when it comes down, you're going to be able to search your library for the other 2 copies of Gathering Throng and put them in your hand. We also have Wedding Announcement, which is a really strong token generator and or card draw, and also a buff when it gets to the 3rd counter and transforms into the enchantment side. We have Adeline, which is probably the most impactful card outside of Thalia in this deck. We have King Darien, which is going to buff all your creatures. We have Tauren's Fist of the Angels, which is going to create a human soldier creature token every time you cast a creature spell. And we have 2 cards in the 4-mana slot, a Wandering Emperor and our Invasion of Gobakhan. Now, the next thing that I would focus on upgrading, and that is a lot of wild cards, to be fair, but the next thing I would focus on upgrading after this is your mana base. Having this many tap lands, especially when you're playing a low to the ground deck, isn't going to be super good. So I would actually encourage you to cut out several of these dual lands and instead just play some extra basics. This is going to guarantee that you can play out your 1 and 2 mana cards on curve, that your tap lands aren't going to disrupt too much of your turn taking. And as soon as you can, I would encourage you to craft some more of the dual lands for the Celestia. Those would be the Brushlands, the Overgrown Farmlands, or the Razor Verge Thickets. Now, because we are actually playing a humans deck, there is a colorless land that we could include called Secluded Courtyard, and this is going to be a creature relevant land. So we'll be able to tap this and add 1 mana of any color to spend a human or soldier or whatever kind of creature type we name spell. Because we have so many humans in this deck, we would probably want to include a few of these just to replace some of our tap lands. We'll take out that and 1 of the Radiant Groves. And this way, we don't have to worry about if we have the mana for a Catilda or a Parkite's Pegasus or a King Darien. We'll be able to play down our plains and make sure we can guarantee our green sources with the Secluded Courtyard. We still do want a forest, an actual forest, for Join the Dance, so we're going to keep that 9 count of forest manas in there. But I think this is probably a pretty smooth way to go. And that is going to be the upgrade for Strength in Numbers. Next up, we have Stealthy Subterfuge. And so in the ninjutsu deck, as it is, what you really want to do is establish a turn 1 or turn 2 creature that won't be able to be blocked the following turn. And the easiest way to do that in the current format is via your flyers. So we're looking at things like Thousand-Faced Shadow, which has flying, Network Disruptor, which also has flying, something like an Inkrise Infiltrator, worked really, really well in our starter duel games. But we really want to include some more of these right off the bat, and then just choose a couple of the really, really effective ninjutsu cards to build around that, in addition to some of the kaitos. So the first thing we're going to do is take out some of the less helpful cards. We're going to go ahead and drop the Long Reach. We'll drop the Mukatai Ambushers. We're going to drop 1 of the Moonsnare Specialists, the Behold the Unspeakable, and the Dokuchi Shadow Walkers. This means that our top end is going to be Kotos, the Silent Spider. And now we'll take a look at some of the cheaper plays here. So I am not as much a fan of Fake Your Own Death, so we'll go ahead and cut some of those out. And actually, before we go any further, I think it does make some good sense to change us over from the Alchemy to the Standard format. We'll get all the cards that we want to take a look at that way. Let's take a quick look, too, at the ninjutsu mechanics that we have available to us. So we talked earlier about Thousand-Faced Shadow. This is going to be a very, very effective card to have. When it comes down for 4 mana, ninjutsu'd, you're going to be able to create a token of another target attacking creature. That is going to be very helpful when you're trying to overwhelm the board. Moon Circuit Hacker is also really nice, a very cheap cost ninjutsu for 1 blue mana. It's going to allow you to draw and discard. Prosperous Thief is also a fairly cheap ninjutsu for 2, and whenever 1 or more ninja or rogue creatures are going to deal combat damage, you get to create a treasure token. This is going to help you ramp. It's going to help you be able to replay whatever you picked up for the ninjutsu. Moonsnare Specialist can be pretty good. I think it is dependent on the matchup. but it's definitely worth a 1 or 2 copy inclusion. But the one that has caused me the most trouble playing against this deck is Dokuchi Silencer. So whenever Silencer deals combat damage to a player, you can discard a creature card and destroy a target creature or planeswalker that opponent controls. Now this is kind of insane. All you need to do is get down a flyer, ninjutsu out that flyer for this 2-mana Dokuchi Silencer, discard that same flyer you picked up, and you get to destroy any target creature or planeswalker you want. A very, very strong card, and I think underrated in the current format. Now, there is an Izumi Prowler. This is going to give creatures Death Touch and Lifelink, or rather a target creature, Death Touch and Lifelink when it enters. This can be pretty good. So, the 1 copy Biting Palm Ninja that does come with this deck is, I think, really, really good. Similar to the Invasion of Gobakhan in the Celestia deck, this is a way to disrupt their play pattern and give yourself a really great chance of pulling ahead and planning around what they might have. So as many of these as you can fit, I would go up to 3 just to start, and then as you play more games, maybe add the 4th one. But the other card that I think you have to play if you're playing a ninja deck, just because it's so much fun, is Nashi Moon Sage's Scion. Now, I wouldn't suggest necessarily crafting these, but I have picked up 2 just from the packs that I've gotten as rewards. And I have to say, whenever this card does come in, it tends to be a lot of fun. So it has a high cost for ninjutsu at 3 mana and a black, but whenever Nashi deals combat damage to a player, you get to exile the top card of each player's library, and you can play one of those cards by paying life equal to the mana value rather than paying its mana cost. Normally, because we're on an aggressive game strategy, we're not going to be falling behind our opponent's life total. We're probably going to be pushing damage. We're going to be somewhere around 16 to 20 life by the time Nashi is able to start connecting, and that's going to be able to give us a really unexpected boost in how many cards we can put down on the battlefield or how much removal we can spend to clear our opponent's board. So I'm actually going to include both copies of Nashi. Now, if you want to keep as many uncommons as you can in this deck, I would suggest playing a full set of Silver Fur Master and then including things like Nezumi Prowler. But because this is an upgrade deck, I am instead going to focus on the cards that we already have 1 or more copies of. So we'll go ahead and move our March of Wretched Sorrow to the side for now, and add a Thousand-Faced Shadow. Now I think in a perfect world you would have 4 copies of this. Because it is a rare that can only really be played in this deck, I'm not as much a fan of crafting it here, but we will add the other copy that I have. I do really like having all 4 copies of Fading Hope in this deck as well. And if we can, add 1 more flyer in to our 1 or 2 mana slot. So we could add another Network Disruptor, which could tap something down when it comes onto the battlefield and allow us to maybe attack with one of our grounded Dokuchi Silencers or Biting Palm Ninjas. Or we could add something that is a little cheaper and has some more value, something like a Fairy Vandal, which will get a +1/+1 counter when we draw our second card, something like a Ledger Shredder, but I think I want to go into black and see what we can pull from that. Now, Inkrise Infiltrator is an option. It doesn't really have a lot of other upside other than its mana sink, but because we're playing 4 Dokuchi Silencers, it might be an interesting play to include a one-off Spin of the Raven. So at the beginning of each step, if a player discarded a card this turn, you could create a 1/1 black bird creature token with flying, and you can also make your opponent discard by paying 4 mana and tapping this card. I think this is an interesting inclusion here, and it gives you kind of a somewhat never-ending stream, or at least another outlet for those 1/1 flyers. So I'm going to put a 1 copy of the Raven Man in here. And then I think we have to find some better removal and maybe another Kaito. So 3 mana removal isn't going to be the best on-curve play for this deck. Hero's Downfall is okay in a limited format, but for this, we're going to go ahead and pop that out. Satora Umezawa is not a terrible way of getting more cards off the top of your deck, but on its own isn't going to pull a whole lot of weight, so I'm actually going to advise cutting that, and instead adding more copies of Kaito Shizuki. This is going to come down and create ninjas. It's going to allow you to continue your top of the deck filtering by drawing and discarding, and we're going to add 2 more copies of that to get it to 3. Now that brings us to 58 out of our 60 cards, and I really do like the March of Wretched Sorrow as our removal spell, so we'll add 2 more copies of that as well. This is kind of where I would leave this. We're very heavy on the 1, 2, and 3 drops, which is always good for an aggro build. We have a little bit of top-end play in terms of Kotos, in terms of our Kaito, in terms of the Raven Man, and also Nashi. And the next thing I would do is work a little bit more on, again, the mana base. Now, because so many of these creatures are ninjas, the first thing we'll do is go ahead and add some of those secluded courtyards like we did in the Celestia build. We'll actually put in 4 copies of that. We'll take out 2 of our tap lands, and 2 more of our different tap lands. And we do have a few non-creature spells that we need both colors for. We need blue on turn 1 for Fading Hope. We definitely need some black on turn 2 and turn 3. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the rest of these kind of as they are. You could always add maybe 1 or 2 more of the basic lands and cut some Dismal Blackwaters, but I think it's going to be important to try to fit in a few more dual lands. And so this is where I would upgrade the Stealthy Subterfuge deck to. In the first slot, we have Fading Hope, 4 copies, 3 Network Disruptors, 2 Thousand Face Shadows. In the 2 slot, we have our Moon Circuit Hackers, which are going to let us draw and discard. We have our Dokuchi Silencers, which are going to act as our removal. Some Inkrise Infiltrators, a little more evasive flying. Raven Man, which is on its own a discard effect, plus some payoff for the discard from our Dokuchis. Silver Fur Master, which is going to act as a Lord for our Ninja and Rogue creatures. Prosperous Thief, which is going to let us ramp a little bit by creating treasure. Biting Palm Ninja for some hand disruption. Nashi for some extra card advantage, Kaito for some card draw and board population through their 1/1 ninja creations. And then we finish off with a Moon Snare Specialist and our Kotos with March of Wretched Sorrow being our other removal spell. So now let's turn our attention to On the Hunt. So as with the previous 2 builds, I think it usually tends to be better for newer players to focus on low to the ground, kind of faster, more cohesive strategy decks. Now, it's pretty easy with this werewolf deck to get a little carried away and play some of the 6-mana Avabrook Caretakers or Tovolar Huntsman, but I think that's going to be a little too slow, especially for the current meta. Instead, what you should be focusing on is putting down as many high-value creatures as you can, making sure you have plenty of removal and protection spells, and then making sure you have some way to get around those inevitable board wipes. The first thing we're going to do is change our format from Alchemy Standard and add the Not Collected. We're then going to take a look at this Lambholt Harrier, which is just a little too slow. We'll go ahead and take out both of those. We'll take out 1 copy of the Snarling Wolf. Axong Pup I am actually a fan of. It's a little slow in the current meta, but I think if it comes down and stays around, maybe as a 1 or 2 copies of card, the payoff can be surprisingly good sometimes. Plus, the life gain when it dies can definitely help stabilize your life total and help you take 1 or 2 more turns to get back into a game. We're then going to cut all of the 5 mana plus cards. There are definitely better options once you get up into there, but again, we want to focus on our lower to the ground cards. We're also going to remove the Fangblade Brigand. We're going to remove 1 copy of the Weaver of Blossoms. And this is going to be the core that we're going to build around. Now, if we take out the instant and sorcery speed spells that we have in this deck, this is kind of where we're at. We have a pretty good 2, 3, and 4 crew, but especially with wolves, and especially using Tovolar as the main build around, we want to be able to get down as many wolves as possible as fast as possible, so that when Tovolar comes down, those payoffs will start happening. So Tovolar says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more wolves and are werewolves, it becomes night, and then you transform any human werewolves that you control. And when Tovolar has transformed, anytime a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage, you draw a card, and you can start sinking some of your mana into buffing some of your lower power and toughness creatures. this can be really, really good. But in order to get there, we have to have some lower end spells. So let's go ahead and see what we might add. So we'll go ahead and look for wolves. We'll look in the green colors first. And the thing that stands out most to me is Ascendant Pack Leader. Now I think in a wolf or werewolf deck, this is going to be a 4 of add. It's a great 2/1 with upside, and says whenever you cast a spell with mana value 4 or greater, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Pack Leader. This is going to threaten to trade for some of the mono red creatures just by having 2 power. It's going to grow as you ramp with Kessig Naturalist into your 4 mana cards. And it's a really great way to get 1 or 2 of these on the board to then enable Tovolar. So we'll do a full playset of Ascendant Pack Leader. The next card I want to look at is actually a 3-drop called Cemetery Prowler. A Cemetery Prowler, I think, is one of the hardest mythics to crack, just because it is very much a green card. So when it comes down, it is a 3/4 body, which is already excellent. Tough to remove for mono red, and 3 costed makes it a really, really good value play. And it has vigilance, and it exiles cards from the graveyard and gives you a discount for the cards that you have exiled. So it reads that spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each card type that they share with cards exiled with Cemetery Prowler. So if you exile a creature card, you get a discount of 1. That doesn't happen with every single creature that you exile, unfortunately. But if you exile a creature and an instant and a sorcery, then all of a sudden your creatures, instant, and sorceries are all discounted by 1. And this can be a really good play, especially as you start getting up into the turn 3 and 4 range for us. So we're going to add 2 copies of this as a good body, and then we're going to fill out our playset of Kessig Naturalist. Now, Kessig Naturalist is going to be a really great enabling card here. When it's flipped today, Kessig Naturalist says whenever Naturalist attacks, you add a red mana or green mana, and until end of turn, you don't lose that mana. So when it attacks, that mana will stick around into your second main phase, allowing you to play something else. This can help ramp you from a turn 2 or 3 to maybe a turn 4 or 5 play. And also, it can be used to just get something else on the board. When it flips, it does become a lord. So if you get, say, a turn 1 Ascendant Pack Leader, into a turn 2 Kessig Naturalist, into a turn 3 Tovolar, following turn, Tovolar, because there are 3 wolves or werewolves on the board, is going to flip it to night. All your creatures are going to transform, including Kessig Naturalist, which is then going to buff your other wolves and werewolves with a +1/+1. This is going to be one of the other linchpins of this deck. It's going to help you ramp, it's going to help you draw, it's going to help you get over some of those other opposing creatures. A really solid addition. So this gets us 2 short of our 60 card limit. The other thing I'm going to do, and I should have done this earlier, is of course fill out our Tovolar. I have no problem with adding 4 copies to this deck because Tovolar is such a great enabler here. The one card that I think is up to you is Howling Moon. You do have a copy that comes with the starter deck, and this can be an okay play against decks that are playing blue control, against Azorius, against some sort of Dimir control, but I don't think in our deck it's going to be as relevant, so go ahead and cut that. And then I'm actually okay leaving the rest of this deck as it is. We have 4 removal spells. We have a Natural Moonrise, which is going to allow us to give something trample, a small buff, and potentially draw a card. And we have our 4 drops, which are all going to be fairly powerful when they hit. They have Howlpack Piper, which is going to allow us to put things onto the battlefield at a significant discount. We have Arlen, we have Child of the Pack, which is going to be a mana sink, and we have Helana and Elena. But again, we really want this deck to go fast. We want to get as many wolves and werewolves down on the board as possible, take advantage of our Tovolar and our Kessig Naturalist, and push through the damage. Just as with the other decks, this is very much a tribal sort of build, which is going to mean that Secluded Courtyard is a good addition. And again, this is an uncommon card, so not too painful to crack. And when we add 4 of these, we can go ahead and we can take away 4 of the other dual lands, the tap lands that we have. So I think this is a pretty okay place to leave it. We could even take away 2 more of these dual lands, add some basics, It's probably not going to hurt, and this is what I would upgrade on the hunt to. Next, we're going to take a look at the Spellweaver deck. We will change our format from Alchemy to Standard and select Not Collected so that we can see all the cards that we have or don't. And now let's take a look at the deck as it is. So the way that the build is given to us, it's a little dependent on our 3, 4, and 5 mana cards coming down, not being interacted with, and slowly accumulating value over many turns. I don't think there are enough high-powered cards in this deck as it is to really make that work. And I think for most newer players, again, lower to the ground, Izzet spell-slinging type deck is going to be fairly effective. So let's go ahead and remove the things that I don't think you need to invest in right away. That'll be the Smoldering Egg, the Twinferno, the Electric Revelation, Badric Astral Archmage, the Wandering Mines, the Serum Core Chimeras, the Revenge of the Drowned, Seize the Storm, and the Storm Skrillex. Now, what's left, I think, are fairly reasonable inclusions. I might take out Arcane Infusion, but we'll see what we come up with now. So some things off the top of my mind that make a lot of sense in this deck are some way to recur the instant and sorcery spells that you do have. So this could be something like a Bloodthirsty Adversary. And this is a mythic, so it is a little harder to craft, but I think 2 copies is a pretty good inclusion. And we could also add some of the mono-red mainstays. We're looking at things like Phoenix Chick, which could be a 1, 2, or 3 copy inclusion. We have Monastery Swift Spear, which could also be a 1, 2, or 3 copy inclusion. We have Invasion of Tarkir, which is, again, a mythic, but I think 2 copies of this is fairly effective. And because we are looking to go fast, get some creatures off the board, enable our Swift Spears and our Phoenix Chicks and our adversaries to get in for some damage, flipping this is going to be fairly achievable. Next, I would look to add another Spell Spear in the form of Kenra Spell Spear. I think this is probably one of the better uncommon cards you could run in a red or red-blue deck. So we'll go ahead and add 2 copies of that. But because we are a spell-slinging deck, we don't want to add too many creatures. We want to make sure that we are able to cast some instants and sorceries and utilize the buffs from these cards. So with that, we're actually going to go ahead and drop the Geist Flame Reservoir and add a Planeswalker, which, even though it isn't an instant or sorcery, it is a non-creature spell, which is going to trigger Prowess, and also will trigger our 3rd path Iconoclast. So we will add 1 copy of that, and I also think a top-end play like Chandra Hope's Beacon is a pretty good addition too. So even though we're playing really low to the ground with a lot of 1 and 2 mana spells, and being a little bit middling with just 1 or 2 copies each of a 3, 4, and 5 mana spell, I think adding a Chandra Hope's Beacon might be just what we need in a few of those games where we get close but can't quite cross the finish line or run out of gas. So I actually really like this deck as it is with just those few adjustments. I think getting out some early tiny creatures is always good play, having some card draw, having a little bit of removal, having a way to recur some of that removal and card draw, and then having a lot of payoff cards in 3rd Path Iconoclast, in Kenra Spell Spear, in Electrostatic Infantry. I think that's a really solid 1-2 base. And then everything else on top of that is just window dressing. We have our Chandras, which are going to help ramp us, deal a little bit of damage, look at the top card of our library. We have Burn Down the House, which is going to save us if we get overwhelmed, maybe by a mono green deck. We have our Chandra for our very, very top end to help us push through that last bit of damage. And then we do have that 1 copy of Lear, Disciple of the Drowned. So because we're playing so many 1 and 2 mana spells, it's important to be able to get those back in some way later in the game. And Lear is exactly what the doctor orders there. So Lear gives each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard flashback. When this comes down, everything in your graveyard that you've cast in terms of the instant and sorceries, all of a sudden you can cast again. Now, I think this might even be a 2 mana or a 2 copy type card, but I'm not entirely sure what I would drop. Maybe a Burn Down the House. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and leave this as our deck. We have very heavy 1 and 2 mana spells. We have a good diversity of card draw, of damage, of triggers. And then we have a pretty strong endgame in Lear and Chandra. Now, because we do have some of these higher power cards, and because we do have some double mana, some double red spells like Chandra, I think it's okay to leave in all of these dual lands. There's no clear tribal theme to this. But if you wanted to upgrade those lands, that would not be a terrible investment. You could add some Shivan Reefs, you could add some more Stormcarved Coasts. Either way, you're going to want to make sure that you do have a few dual lands at your disposal. And I think this is where we're going to end it. This is the update to Spellweaver. In the 1-drop, we have Considers, Monastery Swiftspears, Phoenix Chicks, and 2 Play With Fires. In the 2-drop, we have a Braid, we have Bloodthirsty Adversary, Electrostatic Infantry, Invasion of Tarkir, Henra Spellspear, Lightning Strikes, a Reckless Impulse, Arcane Infusion for a little bit more filtering, Third Path Iconoclast, and then in the 3, 4, and 5 drops, we have Thirst for Discovery, a little card draw, Chandra, a little ramp and card draw, Memory Deluge and big score, some more card draw, Lear, an excellent card to get all those 1 and 2 mana spells back, and Chandra at 6 mana to finish it off. And finally, that brings us to Angelic Accountants. So Angelic Accountants is going to be the most straightforward tribal deck. We'll go ahead and set our format to standard, make sure we're looking at the not collected as well, and we'll start with our cuts. So the first things we're going to want to cut out are kind of the over-costed cards that are going to be difficult to find and to get the payoff from. These are going to be Sigarda Summons, some of the Angelic Quartermasters, maybe one of the Metropolis Angels, and then I want to cut the Borrowed Times. I don't think these are the best removal for this deck. We're also going to go ahead and take out the Perish Blade Trainees, the Light the Way, and the Planar Incision. And this is what we're going to be left with for now. So off the top of this, what we really wanted to do with this deck is fly over our opponents. We wanted to stall the board, gain some life to offset the early plays, build up our flyers, add 1/1 counters to everything, and finish the game fairly quickly. However, the way that it was built, it just wasn't quite consistent enough for me. I think you need more early angels, you need more 2 and 3 mana angels, some more card draw, some more payoffs and removal, and this is how I think we're going to go about doing it. So we already have 1 copy of Giada, Font of Hope. I think that Giada is worth 4 copies. Even if you have multiple copies in hand and on board, she can replace herself and also give herself a buff. So Giada says that each other angel you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it for each angel you already control, and it helps you ramp into more angels. I think Giada is a great card. It often gets removed on turn 2, and that's okay. Even better if you have a backup. So we'll include a couple copies of Giada. A couple more, rather. The next cards we're going to look at are the other angels we have at our disposal. And I'm going to put in 2 copies of Guardian of Ghirapur, which is a flyer, of course, 3/3 flyer, that when it enters, we get to exile up to 1 other target creature or artifact we control and return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So this is going to let us play out Guardian of Ghirapur and maybe return an Inspiring Overseer, something that's going to come back in and have a trigger, something like a Rafine's Informant, which is going to come back and connive and draw us another card. We're also going to add 2 copies of Metropolis Reformer. Now this is a 2/3 flying Vigilant angel that gives us as a player hexproof, and also says whenever Metropolis Reformer is dealt damage, we gain that much life. This is an excellent toolkit card against the mono reds of the world, and also can get you over the finish line on its own if you have a Giada, Font of Hope, on the board. Most of these 3-drop angels we're hoping are going to come down after Giada, and so they're going to be 1 power and toughness greater. At least that's what we hope for. The next angel we're going to take a look at is going to be actually a 6-drop. So we're going to go all the way to the very end and find Sanctuary Warden, a 4-mana, 2-white flying angel soldier. When it enters, has 2 shield counters on it. And whenever Sanctuary Warden enters or attacks, we can remove a counter from a creature or planeswalker we control and draw a card and create a token. This is going to be really good for offering yourself a little bit more protection. Any destroy effects, any target effects that deal damage or single out Sanctuary Warden aren't going to be able to destroy it if we have a shield counter on it. So this is going to have some staying power, and it's going to replace itself no matter what happens to it because of this remove a counter, draw a card. So we're going to add 2 copies of that. We also have Elspeth Resplendent, which, while a very strong card that can pull out any of our 3 mana, isn't worth a full craft, so we'll just do 1 more copy of that. And then we'll take a look at the blue-white angel Errant Engiata. Now this is a 3 mana flash flyer that is going to allow us to look at the top card of our library anytime and cast spells with flash or flying from the top of our library. So we're going to want a few copies of this, maybe 2, maybe 3. I'll go ahead and add 2 for now, but you can certainly add another one if you'd like. And the nice thing about Errant Engiata is that you can hold it during your opponent's turn, play it out on their end step, and then give yourself an additional look at another card from the top of your library to continue accelerating your own play. I think this is a really great addition. It has to be in any blue-white angels deck that you play, and is going to enable you to keep your foot on the pedal as you pick up steam. Lastly, we are going to exchange some of these Homestead Courages for one of my favorite blue cards, Fading Hope. 4 copies in this deck I think is excellent. If you have one in your opening hand, you're going to be able to return whatever your opponent is going to throw out in terms of creatures. It's going to disrupt their tempo. It's going to allow you to force them into a decision where they need to choose if they're going to remove your Giada or if they want to play something out onto the board. Because if they don't remove that Giada, all of a sudden you come in with a strong turn 3 play, you're going to outbody them, there's a flyer on the field that they need to take care of, they are at a disadvantage immediately. I do like Valorous Stance from the initial deck build. I think having some form of protection for your creatures is great, and this can give a target creature indestructible, and it also functions as a way to remove some of the bigger threats from your opponent, at least those with toughness 4 or greater. So this is where I would actually upgrade the Angels deck to. I think not having a turn 1 play is okay, so long as you have some interaction. I think you will eventually gain back your life and your card draw advantage through your 3 mana drops. And I think you have some really strong finishers in Elspeth Resplendent and Sanctuary Warden. So let's take a look at what this looks like. In the 1-drop, we have Fading Hopes. In the 2-drop, we have Giada, Font of Hope, Rafine's Informant, and 2 copies of Valorous Stance. In the 3-drop, we have Guardian of Girpor at 2 copies, 3 copies of Inspiring Overseer, 2 copies of Metropolis Reformer, 2 copies of Thirst for Discovery, 3 Celestial Regulators, and 2 Errants and Giadas. In the 4-drop, we do have and are keeping the Undercover Operative from the initial deck build. I think this can be a fun creature card to play with. And we also have 2 copies of Metropolis Angel, which will be a nice draw payoff for all of the +1/+1 counters we're going to be putting on things. We wrap things up with Elspeth Resplendent, the Sanctuary Warden, and 1 copy of our Exile effect in March of Otherworldly Light. And with that, we're going to call it a day for this deck upgrade tutorial. I hope you enjoyed the deck building and you found some helpful tips. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, and comment, as it really does help my small channel grow, and I will see you for part 2 of our deck building series next time.